Alrighty. That was a heck of a weekend. There were some good games, some not so great games. The Sunday night game on Fox, Sunday evening game on Fox, I should call it, was pretty great.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very exciting game.
Compelling matchup.
The one before it was compelling. Yesterday, I guess not so much. But let's start with the game tonight because it was such a fascinating game. Wilson versus Rodgers. Wilson has had such a good year this year. Rodgers has not had as good of a year this year. And we talked a lot about how defense doesn't matter, right? You should not go into a game like this and try to use the defense to predict who's going to win. And I think it's very important for us to talk about this because people misconstrue this all the time. We talked about it with Josh when he came on. Defense doesn't matter simply means that offense is what is most predictive. And actually, this game was a perfect example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were told the entire, sort of going into the game that Green Bay was more stout up front than Seattle. And they were. I mean, they pressured Wilson on more than 50% of his dropbacks. But ultimately, Russell Wilson and the Seahawks outgained the Packers. They made a lot of plays. Wilson had a 106 passer rating when pressured. Their yards per play were actually higher than their historical average for the season. I think they were something like 5.7, and they were a little bit, So Seattle, the Seahawks were yards per play this year. This is great podcast. Yeah, but they both teams had higher yards per play than they did during the season. Both defenses sort of gave up things that they didn't give up during the season. And ultimately, the Packers made just a couple extra plays, and Seattle refused to make a couple extra plays. And that's why, if you bet Seattle +4, +4.5, you lost by a point or a half a point. And if you laid the points with Green Bay, congratulations.
Right. I mean, you missed a 2-point conversion and a field goal. That's rough. But you brought up a good point we were talking before this, which is like Malik Turner drops a stone-cold wide-open pass. That's not an example of Green Bay's defense being great. Right? It's an example of offense dictating what happens in this game. Great offense is going to win out, right? That's just what happens. And bad offense is also going to make your defense look good, right? So Russell Wilson in this game, his fatal flaw was that he held onto the ball a long time and he did not feel the pressure. And Aaron Rodgers, we talk about how many throwaways he has. He did have a few in this game, but what really separated him was he made a lot of great throws downfield, and he made them on third down. That's not something that's necessarily stable. On first down, the Seahawks were a better team. But in a single game, those things can happen. It doesn't mean that you should predict things based on it going forward, but in one game when you're watching it, it can, A, make it very fun to watch, and B, propel you to victory. In this one, it was cool to see Aaron Rodgers play well.
The touchdown pass to Adams, the final throw to Adams
was awesome.
The catch that Jimmy Graham made in the last.
What were the Seahawks doing though? Devontae Adams took up over 50% of Aaron Rodgers' targets, and rightfully so because he was just destroying all defensive backs. It was Ugo Amadi that was on him there at the end, who's probably 5'8" on Devontae Adams, and he just lets him get outside.
I know the kneel downs are going to obscure this a little bit, but Packers had less than basically a half a yard less yards per play than Seattle. Green Bay, though, they converted 9 of 14 third downs. That's winning. You're going to win football that way. Aaron Rodgers did not miss a pass that traveled over 10 yards in the air. I mean, he had just a
6 for 6. He was tremendous.
He had just a tremendous night. We've seen that at times this year, right? He's played that way. He's capable of playing that way, and he has been even as this downturn in his career has commenced. Another thing, of course, if you're looking at just reasons why. I mean, this game ended up basically being. I think the 4.5 was the right side. Again, as you said, the missed 50-yard field goal. You talk about that, probably a 50-50 proposition. The missed 2-point conversion. Again, 50-50 proposition. Multiply those together. You're in a 1/4 situation there. The other one that probably is going to chap a few people's asses if they back Seattle or they just rooted for Seattle in the first quarter with 4:57 left, the Seattle decided to punt on a 4th and 1 from the 43. I don't understand how, if you're a team, well, for one, they ran on the 3rd and long 1 to Marshawn Lynch. You have Wilson as a threat there. They did a very good job on throwing on short yardage plays later in the game, but they fundamentally refused there. They were only down 7-0 at the time. After forcing a rare Green Bay punt on their second possession, they decided to punt it back to Green Bay. So I just look at this game and I think to myself, okay, both of these teams probably punching a bunch above their weight class record-wise. Green Bay got a few breaks and then made a few breaks, and that's why they won.
We're going to talk about Green Bay in a second because they're going to the NFC Championship game, and we're going to talk about that game. But let's stick with Seattle because this game was so indicative of all of the things that are great about the team, which is Russell Wilson in the passing game, and all the things that stymie it repeatedly, which is just like continuing to run the ball. Yep. They just, every time they ran the ball, it was like, oh man, I can't believe they're running the ball here. Yeah. Like they should let Russell Wilson throw the ball because every time he drops back to pass, you are terrified if you're the opposing team.
Yep.
And they refused, to take advantage of him as much as they should. And they refused to go for it on 4th and short in games where they're an underdog. Yep. Even, Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, who has this weird thing where he is conservative when he is a favorite, but when he's an underdog, he goes for it. He at least understands that, and Pete Carroll has just not done that. And I wonder if they look back on this game and they're able to pick those things out and correct them for next year because they're paying Russell Wilson all this money, and that team wasn't perfect, but they were a possession away, right? A drop away from having a chance to go to the NFC.
When we talk about the Vikings, with their only having 2 receivers, the Seahawks have a similar straits. They don't even have really an NFL, starting tight end on their team, and Wilson was still making, a lot of plays. I know Dwayne Brown was, banged up. George Fant was also banged up. So, commendable. I mean, it sucks because we also, saw this almost exact same result when the Seahawks lost at home to the Niners. I jokingly said to a couple friends in DMs, like, the Seattle's got Green Bay right where they want them, but it'd be nice if they didn't get, so far behind early in games, because that would have been they probably would have won this game outright had they won a few more possessions early on in the game offensively, but they just messed around with too many run pass sequences. So, but here's another thing I want to say about the Packers in a positive light. So there was another primetime game they played against Kansas City where Andy Reid punted the ball when they were down 6 or 7 or something like that, and they never saw the ball again, right? And it shows you that, like, so if you're Seattle here, for example, you're down 5, you're at your own end of the field. It's 4th and long, but doable. Like, it's not 4th and 30. The 4th and 11, a little under 3 minutes left, you punt the football. You're not. There's a good chance you're not seeing that ball again, right? Like, if you have Russell Wilson, your goal should be to lose the football game with the ball in his hands, not in the ball in your defense's hands. We saw it with Kansas City when they lost to the Packers as well. The Packers do a pretty good job late in games. They run the football, but they put the ball in Rodgers' hands. And, in those 2 do he did make plays. He made enough plays. Well,
that was a mistake, obviously, but there were a couple of things that led up to that. It was, I believe, 3rd and 6, and then Wilson took a sack, right? So if it's 4th and 6, you've got a much better shot of converting it. Maybe Carroll actually does go for it. So that was a place where I think Russell Wilson burned him a little bit. Mm-hmm. And obviously they should have gone for it, but like, you've got to help your coach out make these decisions. And to the Seahawks then were at the mercy of Aaron Rodgers. And it's a great example of exactly what we have been talking about this whole time, which is great offense is going to beat any defense. It doesn't matter how good they are. They got Aaron Rodgers into these 3rd and longs, and it didn't matter because he was able to get Devontae Adams where he wanted him. He was able to get Jimmy Graham where he wanted him and delivered the ball, in a perfect position. It was his highest graded game pending review since week 6, which was at home against Detroit.
To your point about Wilson, in the 42 dropbacks that we have charted, 35 of them resulted in a dropback of 2.6 seconds or more, just 7
ridiculous.
In under 2.5 seconds.
It's absurd.
His average time to actually throw the football was 3.8 seconds. His average time to sack was 4.8 seconds. I'm sorry. if you are, the Seahawks did a good enough job pass protecting tonight. They
were actually really solid.
And Wilson, and to our, as we've written up a number of times, part of the defense doesn't matter thing is that quarterbacks own their own pressure rate. Like, he invited that stuff, and granted, he had a 107 rating when hanging onto the ball too long, but those sacks took a toll, and that's why things like EPA are a better way to measure quarterback play and then passer rating.
Yeah, I mean, the sacks are brutal on the 2-point conversion, right? Also just doesn't see the pressure.
Yep.
I mean, I think his overall average time to throw, which wraps all those things together, was 4 seconds. It's a solid second longer than the highest one in the league this year, and where Rodgers is usually out, where Wilson's usually out, which is 3 seconds. Yep. That's a long time. I mean, he held on to the ball forever, and he makes a lot of really good plays. He made a lot of good plays with his legs in this game.
He has in recent weeks done a really good job running with the football, which was not something he was doing early in the season. Too bad it was not enough here.
Too bad. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was enough. That's the thing. It was enough to cover.
Yeah, if you get a couple plays here by their kicker or by a 2-point conversion,
catching the ball,
or just converting that. I mean, they win the game outright if they drive the ball down the field and score on that last one, but that happens. So good for the Packers, good for the people that support them, and we'll talk obviously about Niners Packers in the sort of in a subsequent segment, but let's
just end it this way. It's great to see great quarterback play.
Mm-hmm.
That game was awesome because two quarterbacks played really, really well.
Yep.
And Aaron Rodgers and his team made more plays when it mattered.
Mm-hmm.
And these games come down to 3 or 4 plays. And this one did. And that's what makes football great. And Aaron Rodgers was great. And I'm happy to see a former Bay Area, son of the Bay Area, play well. And now he gets to go back to try and revenge that loss.
So if we... Let's look back at some of these other games.
Yeah, let's rewind. Let's go back to Saturday.
Yeah, so the Vikings, who were getting 7 points, going on the road.
Feels like a week ago, by the way.
San Francisco. And they take advantage of Akello Witherspoon before he gets benched, put on the pine in place of Emmanuel Mosley. Vikings get a big play, tie the score, give up a touchdown, but then get an interception by Eric Kendricks, kick a field goal. They go into halftime 14-10. And I don't think we appreciated at the time how fraudulent that score was for the Vikings, right? Because by the middle,
to be honest with you, I did.
Yeah.
Because they had 4 first downs, I want to say, and the Niners I think had like 13 through one half.
Yep.
And their entire offense was Akello Witherspoon not playing well in coverage. And then when from that point on, when Emmanuel Mosley played really, really well.
Yeah.
From that point on, they were just, horrific. And the Niners realized that, the Vikings just did not come to play.
Yeah, they're not doing it.
Like that first drive, Jimmy G was just on point, right? They just marched down the field. Their motion was sending all of the linebackers in the wrong direction, and Jimmy was just delivering the ball on point. And then they all of a sudden realized, the Vikings can't score, and they also, they can't even move past the line of scrimmage.
Yep.
And every time they ran the ball, they were just getting blown off the line of scrimmage. And this is why we talk about it all the time. Running the ball is not predictive of future success. But when a team is outmatched in a game, it is the result of a domination.
Exactly.
And so we often attribute it. We're like, hey, they dominated this game. Why? Well, they have 200 rushing yards. It's like, well, no, actually, they got a lead by throwing the ball, and then your team was so terrible that they just got run on for the rest of the game.
Well, and that we're going to talk about college football in a little bit, but that's exactly how college football is. Like, Clemson plays Virginia, and they get ahead with a few passing touchdowns, and then they just are more dominant than the other team the rest of the game, and that manifests itself in the run game, right? Because their linemen are better, and that was true about Minnesota too. I mean, Dalvin Cook had 9 carries for 18 yards. Alexander Mattison 1 for 3. Pat Elflein is not a starting guard in the NFL. Garrett Bradbury has some work to do, and Josh Klein, was sort of a middling free agent signee, and then their right tackle Brian O'Neill got injured in the game, so San Francisco up front was just better than Minnesota, and then Kirk Cousins is one of those quarterbacks that needs a good foundation, right? And the foundation was laid against the Saints by a few players being out for New Orleans, right? And Minnesota scheming up a good set of plays, Thielen gets injured in practice. They're just flat out less athletic than the 49ers in that intermediate level. Rudolph, Smith, they're just not as good as Warner and Quan Alexander and Jakuski Tart and those safeties. So they just had no mismatches other than Diggs against Witherspoon, and that was sewn up pretty quickly. And then Kirk had really nothing. And then, when the interesting thing is we talked about Jimmy G's struggles and how it sort of kept the Seahawks in the game and it kept the Rams in the game. And to Kyle Shanahan's credit, when Jimmy G started to fold a little bit, they just went straight to the run game, and they knew that 4-point lead that
was really more than 4 points.
Yeah.
I actually, people were saying, that he's protecting Jimmy G by not letting him throw the ball after that bad interception. I think that's total baloney. The reason that they started running the ball was because the Vikings didn't want to play defense.
Yep.
Like, they were just getting blown off the line of scrimmage every time, and he was acutely aware of the simple fact that their offense only had these points because of a situation that had been mediated already. So he had nothing to worry about. So it's like, why would I even bother having my quarterback drop back pass, who, by the way, looked like he had a potentially horrific injury in the game, right? Like, the takeaway that I have from that is not about Kyle Shanahan not having faith in Jimmy G. It's about him being acutely aware of the Vikings sucking.
Yeah.
Which
absolutely. So
do you want to talk about your boy?
Who's that?
Your boy, Kevin Stefanski?
Yeah, so Stefanski ends
I can't
up...
believe he still got the job after this performance.
Right, and again, like, this is... So we're getting a lot of these conversations we're having on Twitter, or a lot of these conversations like football people are having. I mean, we're drawing a lot of conclusions from one-game samples, right? So whether it be the Stefanski being a worse hire than Salah because of how this thing interacted on Saturday afternoon, or... how Lamar Jackson should not be the MVP because he played like crap against Tennessee, and then Aaron Rodgers and how all of a sudden he's back to being a Hall of Fame quarterback because of how he played this evening.
I mean, he is a Hall of Fame quarterback.
Yeah, of course. But back to being...
The point being that he's been great all season because of this one game.
Correct. And so how we need to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate how we've seen the entire world forever.
Right. Math needs to change now.
Based on 3 outcomes. Yeah, running backs matter now because Derrick Henry's been awesome for the better part. Ever since Tannehill took over. Huh?
Yeah, it's very interesting.
But yeah, Stefanski, I think I kind of support the hire. I think, there are a couple things about Stefanski, one positive, one negative. The positive for Stefanski is that this offense is not as good as is not as good fundamentally as it performed.
Yep.
Cousins is a middle of the pack quarterback, as we've said, and as you got a lot of flack for, during our preview of the playoffs. The Vikings at times had one NFL caliber wide receiver playing for them. B.C. Johnson, a 7th round pick. Treadwell literally off the scrap heap. Alexander Hollins, and so on and so forth. In a league where, as the Seahawks found out today, you need 3 good wide receivers to compete in the NFL. The Vikings were going through most of the season with 1 and sometimes 2. Offensive line, we've already documented, they're poor. And their defense has gotten a little bit worse, so the offense has had to pick up some slack, right? There was a game against Denver where they had to come back because Brandon Allen was, moving the football on them. So there's that, and yet they went from 18th in yards per play to 10th. They went from like 25th in EPA to 6th or 7th, I think. He did a good job. The negative is, of course, they still run the ball too much, and I wonder how much of that is Zimmer.
You took a very circuitous route to getting to exactly what I was going to bring up, which is the Vikings lost that game when they went run to start the game.
Yep.
Simple as that.
Rob Pizzola said he would have laid minus 200 at that. That would have been the first sequence, run pass.
The Niners came out and they said, we know you're going to do this, and we're going to stuff the crap out of Dalvin Cook. And they did. And then 3rd down came around, and you go, you know what I don't have faith in? Kirk Cousins dropping straight back to pass on 3rd and long.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not how you have success with him. You need to come out and go play action. To the Seahawks' credit, they went play action a lot against Green Bay, despite the fact that their run game was useless, and it worked for them. But the Vikings just refused and went run into the middle of the Niners defense, which is literally waiting for this play. And that is when the game was lost. And I don't think that's a Stefanski thing.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe that Zimmer was like, this is what you're going to do. You're going to establish Dalvin Cook. We're going to get after it. So I am interested to see if he's able to shed that now in Cleveland, because all of the things out of Cleveland have been, look, he's been empowered by Paul DePodesta to use, he has to use analytics.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you've got to actually leverage what math is telling us. And so you would expect them to go, man, if there was a team that was going to go 50% play action in terms of their dropbacks, like, this is it, right? And if there was a team that was going to go for it on 4th down, even if it's 4th and 3 or 4th and 5, or, hey, 4th and 11, when you can either have one shot, one opportunity to win the game, or you can give it to Aaron Rodgers, let him have one.
Yep.
Be my guest. Like, he's going to take it. So I think this was the right hire. I also think it's good for Bobby Salah, because he gets to stay in the California sunshine and run stairs there, which is a much better place. If you've seen the Baker Mayfield commercials, those stairs don't look great.
Well, and that's the thing. So you look at, okay, what happened in Cleveland this year? They had probably more talent offensively than Minnesota. They were weak on offensive line, just like the Vikings, but they were strong at running back and they were strong at wide receiver, and they had a quarterback that could go either way, right? That's basically the Browns. And so Stefanski took that type of offense and made them pretty good this year, despite Shaq. Basically, he knew that they fired DeFilippo because he passed too much, right? So you have a mandate to run the football, and you can still carve out a scheme that's somewhat effective. Despite that, so if you take away the restriction of having to run so much, I do think that he becomes a good offensive mind. Do you think he calls the plays? Is the question, or do you think the Browns hired him because of his ability to call the plays?
I would hope so.
Because they wanted him he made the finals this last year based upon 3 games calling plays.
Right.
So part of me thinks that...
You don't think he's going to call plays?
Part of me thinks that they like him because of the way that he thinks. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you interview a guy and you're like, what is your philosophy on football? How do you coach players? What would you want to... So part of me thinks that this could also be a situation where... so for example, the Browns hired Todd Monken this year, and Monken turned Fitzpatrick into a viable starting quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2018, and Monken was completely marginalized.
Yeah.
So does he even call the plays? Is a good question.
I would think he does.
Okay, because I think Kitchens was so overwhelmed by the responsibilities of being a head coach and also calling the plays that it could be a situation, for example, when Mike Tomlin took over the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he was similar. He had only 1 year as a coordinator, gets a head coaching job, keeps Dick LeBeau as the defensive coordinator, but still is a great head coach in the sense of his overall team philosophy is a positive EV sort of philosophy. Yeah. So it's just interesting question. If
he has a guy that he feels like they can be on the same page, then sure. But it's all about finding the people to do the things that need to get done and having a trust in them. So clearly I think Kitchens probably took on, he didn't understand what comes with being a head coach and was like, oh, I'm going to do all these different things. Mm-hmm. And you just can't. You need someone to do all of the little shit for you.
Yes.
That you have to put people in position. You are a big manager. That's what you are. And so your biggest asset is putting people in a position to succeed. This is where you're going to win. You go do your job. It's very clear what you need to do. Go do it, right? Yep. And instead, he tried to take all those things on when he was just basically a running back.
When he couldn't manage himself. I mean, that's a difficult thing. So
hey, that's kind of rude.
Okay. So
we done with the Vikings here?
Yeah, so we learned very little about the Niners, I think, in this game, other than they are who our numbers said they were, a top 5 team in the NFL, right? And Minnesota, we don't care anymore because there's going to be a projection out. It looks like George Edwards, the news here, their defensive coordinator's out. So Minnesota is going to change both coordinators, their 5th offensive coordinators in many seasons. It's going to be a weird offseason for Minnesota. No cap room, no defensive backs.
It could go real south.
Minnesota might be an under next year.
Real south, real quick.
Speaking of real south, real quick, Tennessee goes on the road, basically getting 10 points by the time everything closed, 9.5 maybe in some places. Win the game outright, win the game by multiple scores. The Ravens did not come to play offensively on the scoreboard as we predicted, but did finish the game with 530 total yards.
Those are some pretty shallow yards.
Yeah,
there,
exactly. Jackson threw for 365 yards, 2 interceptions, though, 143 yards on the ground, but a lot of that was too late, and a lot of it ended up being punchless given that they could not put the ball in the end zone against the Titans defense.
So here's the thing. We drafted quarterbacks. We did a snake draft on Thursday. And we've also talked a lot about how Russell Wilson has actually earned more wins above replacement than Lamar Jackson.
Yep.
And this is not a knock on Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is fucking awesome.
He's great.
You can bleep that out if you want. I'll say it again. He's fucking awesome. The fact that he's not as fucking awesome as two future Hall of Fame quarterbacks is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But the Baltimore Ravens had not. They had one game where they were losing at the end of the first quarter. It was a loss to Cleveland.
Yep.
They have not had to play from behind. Lamar Jackson has been able to leverage the fact that he is a special once-in-a-generation talent running the football, and they do it super efficiently. He just hasn't had reps playing for having to bring his team back from behind.
Yep. Where
Russell Wilson continually does that. And when he does that, he earns a ton of wins above replacement because that's all on his shoulders. Pat Mahomes, these two games, the Texans-Chiefs game and the Titans-Ravens game, were carbon copies of each other. The difference was that the Chiefs had a quarterback and a passing offense that was going to bring them back, and the Ravens did not. And it's as simple as that.
It ended up being pretty simple there. And it wasn't like we said, like Lamar moved the football after the initial onslaught of points against them. But it was a unwieldy moving of the football. Whereas when Mahomes and the Chiefs took the ball, and granted, they got some luck. I mean, they had a fumble on a kickoff return and Daniel Sorensen made a terrific play on a fake punt. But they got ahead, and in the second half, they took every single possession they had until they called off the dogs and went down and scored. And a lot of it was exactly what we said. I mean, you have Kelsey is one of the most best tight ends in the NFL. Great game today. Tyreek Hill, the best deep threat in the NFL, save maybe a few guys. And then guys that can kind of kill you when they're on, like Sammy Watkins, 2 catches for like 78 yards or something like that. And then Damian Williams made some plays out of the backfield. So it was just an all-around offensive onslaught that the Chiefs were prepared for. And they played games to prepare this way, right? They were behind against Detroit this year, right? With half their receivers injured. They were behind 10-0 against Oakland.
They were behind a lot of the time.
They were behind against Tennessee at times. They were behind against Indianapolis, Houston, right? Not New England so much, but they're prepared for this. And Patrick Mahomes is the type of quarterback that can make this thing happen.
And this isn't to say that you should try to be losing in games. This is about the way that you play the game.
It's about the variance that is inherent in projecting these things out, because our data, right, doesn't have that many possessions where guys like Lamar Jackson are behind. So that is why, like, when we simulate these games out, that's why, the Ravens only had a 25% chance or something to win the Super Bowl, because there are games where there's just so much unknown there.
There's uncertainty.
So you regress them to the market average, right? Whereas when we look at Seattle, right, this is why we like Seattle against the spread, because we knew there was probably going to be some sample paths where Seattle played really well and just won. There are going to be some where they got blown out early and then came all the way back, because that's exactly what we've seen from them. We have a ton of data in different parts of the feature space where we can understand Seattle. We can't do that with like Lamar Jackson. We can do it a little bit with Mahomes, and to Mahomes' credit, like, he did it, right? And we've seen it happen before, and that's why we're a little bit more confident in them.
The Tennessee Titans narrative is that they have just run the ball straight through teams, and that's why they have won. And so I thought it was interesting to take a look at how they built this lead against the Ravens, because that narrative is just straight up false.
Yep.
So through one quarter, the team that had the better rushing offense, using expected points added per play, which is basically yards per play but adjusted for the context of down and distance.
Yeah.
So it tells you better how good that team was on those specific plays. The Baltimore Ravens, through the first quarter, had a much better expected points added per run play than the Tennessee Titans. And yet, the Tennessee Titans were winning this game fairly convincingly. They had 2 touchdowns at this point. And the reason they did was because they were winning the battle of the passing game. Yep. They were averaging 0.4 expected points added per pass play, which is remarkable through quarter one. The Baltimore Ravens, negative 1.1. And that is how they built the lead. The way that they salted the game away was that the Baltimore Ravens continued to be inefficient throwing the ball. They amassed a lot of yards because they had to run a bunch of plays, but they were not efficient, as you mentioned.
Yep.
And then they were simply able to run the ball because, the other team is now at your mercy, right? They're a bunch of plays that, or a bunch of possessions that are short. Yep. The defense is tired, all those things.
This is about, anybody who's taken a stats class or something like that. This is about building that probability tree, right? The first branch is being better than the other team in passing the football. And then after that, you can ask the yes/no question of, can you impose your will in the running game, right? But you need to get that first branch. And I'll even come back to this. Baltimore moved the football in their first drive. What happened? It was like a tip ball interception that ended up ending that drive. So even then, and then their second drive ended in a 4th and 1 on their own end of the field. And what did Tennessee do? They didn't run the ball down Baltimore's throat after that. They play action deep ball to Khalif Raymond, and that was a touchdown. And and then once that happened, it was a Tennessee game. And then Tennessee wants to run the football, and they were pretty good at it. But again, it's because the Ravens all season have been hiding this fact that they're pretty weak in the front seven, right? They started, LJ Fort wasn't even on their team for part of this, for the preseason and things like that. And now he's a starting linebacker. Their front seven, there was only one guy that had over, I believe, 30 pressures this year, and that's Matthew Judon. That's pretty easy to scheme for. What isn't is when you're behind by 10 points against the Ravens and you have to throw, and you're throwing against Jimmy Smith, Marcus Peters, Earl Thomas, Marlon Humphrey. But again, you have to solve the first question first, which is to get ahead.
You throw to get the lead.
Yep.
You run when you are the far better team and you are leading.
Yep.
And that's all you need to know. It's not rocket science, but you can't look at the rolled up version of the game at the end of the game and be like, you know what?
Yeah.
Clearly this team won because they ran the ball. You have to be smart enough to tease out what caused what. And leading, which happens because you're passing, often causes these huge running games. Let's flip it to the Ravens a little bit because they had such a good season, and they were praised so much for all of the analytically sound decisions they made, and they should be. And they went for it on a couple fourth downs and failed.
Yep.
And so people are going to say, well, it doesn't. Maybe you shouldn't make as many of those choices. And it's like, what is so frustrating about that is that just because those two misses came in that game, they could have come sprinkled at any point in the season, right? And if they just get one of those, that game can be totally different. If that tip pass doesn't happen, that game can be totally different. And so that's why you do not.
If they win the toss and take the ball first,
that's why you do not base things on a one-game sample. Because the Baltimore Ravens still had a great season. And John Harbaugh still made great decisions. And all of those decisions in that game were still great. And just because the play didn't work out does not mean you should go abandon it.
And here's the thing. So winning the football games with analytics, right? This is why you don't play the game on paper, blah, 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 right? All that Harbaugh and all that Lamar Jackson and all that defense is doing is trying to take them from a 70% chance to win that game every single time to a 75% chance to win that game every time, right? And when that coin is flipped, which side does it end up on? And and we went over this with the presidential election in 2016. There are 30 things that are supposed to happen 30% of the time happen 30% of the time. It's how it's how it works. You look at this weekend, right? San Francisco is -7. Baltimore was -10-ish. Kansas City ended up -10-ish. And then Seattle was +4 or whatever, right? Well, how did the favorites do? They went 3-1, right? So underdogs win the games, right? About as much as they're supposed to. And, there's a little bit of variance here, but, I tweeted out, we're not doing this. It's actually bad to be 14-2 with a great quarterback and be analytically driven. We're not doing it. And we've seen this with Andy Reid. There's no guarantee that the Ravens with this bunch are ever going to win a Super Bowl. There's no guarantee, but they are giving themselves a better opportunity to do so. I'm writing up an article about the 4 teams that lost this weekend. When I look at them, I think that their weakness is they need wide receivers. Marquise Brown was a good draft pick, but
he was tremendous.
But aside from him, they don't have a guy. They don't have and the tight ends were very explosive this year, but I don't consider them reliable. There was a lot of drops there. They need wide receivers that Lamar can feel comfortable throwing into the intermediate zone.
It's this simple. They need players that are going to help them win when they are losing.
Yeah.
And those are wide receivers.
And that's Tyler Lockett, and that's DK Metcalf, as we saw tonight, right?
That was DK Metcalf 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Not DK Metcalf today.
And then...
But that catch that Hollywood Brown pulled in,
was great.
If they just capitalized on a touchdown there, a totally different game.
For sure.
And that was one of the better catches that I've seen. That guy's awesome. So if they can get one other guy to oppose him, he can stay healthy. I mean, this team, the fact that people are giving Lamar Jackson shit because he is 0-2 in the playoffs when every other, like, he's made it to the freaking playoffs.
I mean, Peyton
twice.
Manning lost a great deal of his playoff games before he advanced to even the AFC Championship game, let alone the Super Bowl. And not to compare Lamar Jackson to Peyton Manning, but again,
they're pretty similar.
Yeah, well, and Patrick Mahomes won the MVP last year. He did not make the Super Bowl. He did not win. So these things are not linear. These don't happen in sequence the way that they're probably supposed to.
That means a straight line for people out there.
I mean, the 2009 Aaron Rodgers was probably better than 2010 Aaron Rodgers, but 2010 Aaron Rodgers strung his games together enough to win the Super Bowl. And then 2011 Aaron Rodgers was even better, and it wasn't good enough, right? Like there's a ton of like variance in how these things happen, and that's what makes football fun. But it also, like, when people want to talk about prognostication, it's just the thing that you have to build in there. So
let's move on to this crazy ass game that happened this morning. Not this morning. Feels like this morning. Kansas City, Houston. So Houston gets out to this massive lead. You are a Kansas City Chiefs fan.
I am.
You considered buying tickets to the Kansas City game and tickets on an airplane to Kansas City
I did.
last night when the Titans won. And so they are down 24. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, but not willing to ask, if you've already purchased a non-refundable plane ticket or not. At that point in time, do not lie to me. What was if you had to put, the chance of the Chiefs coming back and winning, what did you deep down feel it was?
Well, I thought it was probably 1/3.
Okay.
Well, here's the thing. I did not buy a ticket.
You didn't.
I
didn't ask because I didn't want to know.
I didn't actually last night, and because I did think that there was a legitimate chance that it would happen.
Well, I scared you enough because I didn't want you to jinx it. I really didn't want that to happen. I'm a nice person deep down inside.
Yeah. And my friend who I'm staying with, I sent him a message when they were up 17 in the fourth quarter, and I said, "Hey, not to jinx this shit, but how does Friday night to Monday sound?" And it would. When you watch that game, though, it was very reminiscent of the game the night before, right?
It was the same game.
You look at instead of going for it on fourth down and missing, the Chiefs just dropped third down passes and punted. And then there were the turnovers. The turnovers actually were deep in their own end. I don't know when I officially was like they're going to win the football game, but their comeback was so quick that it was sort of like. Eventually, the switch just turned on. I'm like, there's no way they lose this game.
Well, the reason that I went full into the Chiefs live in that game when they were down, I bet them when they're down 14 and 21, I think.
Yeah. They were plus 300 and I think even plus 400 at one point.
I got it around 300 and 250.
Yeah.
And the reason I did that is that drops. So you want it. Just like we talked about the Vikings, right? Yep. The Vikings keeping it close was totally mythical because of the way it happened. Yep. Similarly, the Chiefs being down by 24 was also mythical because of the way it happened, right? The Texans got very lucky with some fluke plays, but also it wasn't as if Kansas City's offense was incapable of getting guys open, right?
They weren't swarmed by pressure. They weren't.
It's like the NBA, right? If a team has a bunch of wide open 3-point looks and it's the Warriors and they've missed them, you're like, oh, I'm going to bet them live. You know why? Because Steph Curry ain't going 0 for 17 in this game. Pat Mahomes is not going to end up his receivers are not going to continue dropping the ball the entire time. Mm-hmm. We know this to be true. And so those 4 drops out of the way early, it was very clear that they had no answer for Travis Kelce. And that is why drop passes, we talk about this a lot, they matter a lot in looking back. It's why when we grade, right, quarterbacks, if they make a good throw, get the grade commensurate with if it was on target or not, whether it was caught. Yep. But also they're unstable looking forward. And, whether you're looking season to season or game to game or play to play, right? Yep. And so you want to take advantage of that because oftentimes the betting market is not.
Let me Let me look at where my tweets were because I was certainly on tilt.
What?
So there was a. This is a complete meltdown.
Yes, I saw that one.
The Chiefs cannot punt the rest of the game. They went on and went 3 and out and punted. They are failing Mahomes with the drops.
Yes.
And then when they were down 24-0, after Bill O'Brien bails them out in their own territory, 4th and 1, they kick a field goal. I ask Andy, I go, hey, 3-8s, Andy. This is all you need, 3-8s.
And then they go right down.
And then I think my secondary tweet was 4-7s.
They go right down and score and then kick the extra point. You're like, oh, man, it's going to be one of these games, which it ended up not being because they just ended up trouncing the Texans. But here was the other crazy part of this game was that the Texans knew they had to throw.
Yes.
The Chiefs said, oh, guess what? We are going to throw. And it didn't matter.
Yeah. The one thing that kept me from really being all in on the Chiefs, and I wrote about this last week, I believe. These weeks are so jumbled together, but I wrote about this last week, I think, was I didn't know if their defense could get a stop. And that to me was the crucial thing. I did not know if their defense could get a stop, especially without Chris Jones, because he's their prominent pass rusher. But I will say this: I was not a fan of their offseason moves defensively. I didn't like trading as much as they traded for Frank Clark. I did not like going into the with Travarius Ward and all those youngsters in the secondary. But I will say this: Tyrann Mathieu is worth every penny that they paid for him. Frank Clark, 3 sacks, 1 hit, 5 hurries today. Terrific work, especially in the second half of the season. Rashad Fenton was an undrafted player that has ended up he played 40 snaps today, was amazing in coverage. And they got just enough stops, right? And enough fluke plays, right? For, Kansas City offense to do what it needed. And ultimately, they didn't even need as many stops as they got, because Kansas City basically scored every single possession from being down 24-0 until they got their 51st point.
So I can't emphasize this enough. Kansas City averaged 0.6 expected points added per pass play, which is the best of any team so far in the playoffs. And the Houston Texans averaged 0. The Houston Texans were a better running team using expected points added per run play. Didn't matter at all because the Kansas City Chiefs threw the ball, and that is ultimately what matters. They were also fantastic on first down and threw the ball a ton on first down, which I think Nance and Romo made a comment about this, but they were like, it's kind of crazy that they're just like continuing to throw the ball and not running it. And at one point when they had 41 unanswered, they had 9 rushing yards for a running back.
7 carries or something like that.
And it scored 41 unanswered. And there was a point where they had 7 straight? I can't remember.
Possessions were with the touchdown.
And 7 running back carries.
Well, and the other
incredible.
thing, being a Chiefs fan and knowing how Andy Reid operates, the thing that I was scared about the most in the second half was that he was going to take his foot off the pedal, because he's done that this year. He's done that at times. And I think, interestingly, being behind by so much and essentially tasting defeat early in the game probably put Andy on notice, because he did not relent. And, so again, we talk about these things as they happen. Houston's defense was a joke most of the season. They play a pretty decent game against Buffalo, but why was that? Because Buffalo's offense sucks, and defense doesn't matter. I tweeted this out during the game. When offense executes, defense doesn't matter. When offense can't execute, defense doesn't matter, right? So
it was the Titans thing, right?
Yeah.
Like the Patriots suck on offense, so the Titans defense looks really good.
And when Lamar Jackson can't hit open throws, it doesn't matter who's in the Titans secondary. When Lamar Jackson fumbles the ball in the backfield, doesn't matter who's in the Titans secondary. So, and when Patrick Mahomes decides he's going to be the league MVP during the course of a game, he probably got, how much WAR do you think he generated in this game?
A decent amount. I will say that I think because of some of the fluky plays that they got, probably not as many.
Right, because there were some short fields.
Like, he didn't have to throw downfield that much. He was super efficient in the intermediate range, but like didn't have to, make any kind of incredible throws. It was a lot. I'm not.
And Travis Kelce,
he was really good.
As far as tight ends go, it's Kittle and Kelce, and Kelce long and short. He's very, I mean, he and Kittle they're a real treat when they can, underneath the coverage in the red zone, but also over the top. Both of them are amazing, and it was great to have him because Hill only got 4 targets today. Watkins, converted the 2 he did have, but it was mostly a Kelsey day. And it's just, to me, it's a beautiful thing to watch quarterbacks throw the ball in the intermediate part of the field. Rodgers tonight, and then also Mahomes.
Okay, we're going to talk about the 2 championship games real quick, though. Bill O'Brien, should he stay with Houston? Should they keep him?
Well, the hard part is that you have to here. I would say yes, because I do think he gets. I think he's better than what people say. But here's the question: do they ever hire a GM as long as he's the head coach? Because if he keeps you from hiring a GM, then I think he probably has to go, because that skill set. Being a GM and a head coach, besides Belichick, name somebody who's actually been proficient at that.
Can't. Greg Popovich.
I mean, Mike Holmgren failed. Mike Holmgren was okay at it in Seattle. We've seen other instances where it's kind of worked, but unless you can convince me that Bill O'Brien is on the Mike Holmgren level of NFL head coaches, it's just not worth it.
I think they should keep him, because I don't know if your answer is really bringing in Josh McDaniels and that
Robert Saleh.
Yeah.
Houston's probably a decent place for Saleh to go if you're looking for somewhere other than California.
True. I could see them, though, making a play for McDaniels and I'm blanking on his name. Who's the Caserio, right? So that's the dark horse candidate, right? Because they wanted Caserio before. So I wouldn't totally rule that out. I do think they should keep him.
Here's the tricky thing about that job. Bill O'Brien, as long as he's the head coach and general manager, will never stop acting like a head coach in that position. So what general manager in their right mind would want a job where the moment you sit down, you're missing, you have so many fewer.
The cupboard is bare.
Cards to play with. It doesn't. They're in a sticky situation here.
Hate to see it. Oh man, I said I wasn't going to do that. Can we cut that? We cut that part out. All right, we're going to do conference championships, but real quick in between, there is a game tonight that we should talk about.
Yes.
That is Monday Night Football on ESPN. No Tess and Boog, which is kind of sad.
I think it's Louis Riddick and a couple and McDonough and maybe a couple. But yeah, anyway.
What?
Louis Riddick calls games on ESPN.
Right.
Oh no, is it going to be the?
It's going to be Herb Street.
Come
on now.
And
come on, Sweet Lou is great, but
maybe Lou's on the pregame show. But I saw him in New Orleans, so maybe he's
on the pregame show. They're not. Herb Street's really good, I think.
Yeah, he's terrific.
They do a great job. So Clemson is now, is it 5 or 5.5 point underdogs? Is it still what it is?
Yeah, so
Clemson got it all the way to 6.5, I believe.
Clemson is getting, so it opened at 4, and then the look ahead was 1 after the initial weekend, which seems like forever ago. Got out, opened at 4, got out to about 7. Now it's back to 5.5. Total has gotten as high as 70, is now down to 67.5.
Now, I try as best I can not to watch a whole lot of college football, which is a good thing for me. It helps my life in general because I have way more time to do things that are not agonizing and terrible, like watching college football. Mm-hmm. However, I did watch both of the semifinal games, and I can totally see how most of America also watched only those games, and it makes perfect sense to me why LSU is now all the way out to this kind of large number.
Yep.
And I just think it makes sense, and mathematically, our model seems to agree with me.
Yeah.
That if you're going to take one side of this game,
it's got to be Clemson. I mean, the thing is we've had Clemson probably a little higher than market. We had them as the favorite going in, and then LSU blows out Oklahoma. But there's a clear question. Like, again, this is like taking Seattle tonight. Taking Seattle tonight was a good bet. Didn't work out. You want to make a sequence of good bets. Clemson being 1 on the look ahead, then 4, then and then seeing some money drag it down to 5.5. Like, Clemson is the right bet to make.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm probably going to go little Clemson money line.
A little Clemson money line.
And
what if you have some Clemson futures though? Do you buy a little bit of LSU back at the
probably
at the minus?
But if you're listening to this podcast, I hope all 7 of you have joined my side of the table, which is we like our Saturdays. Saturdays are for the people who want to enjoy their lives. And that you haven't watched a lot of college football, and so you don't have any futures, and you're just looking to do something where you can kick back and relax. And that, I think, is
this reminds me a lot.
Clemson.
This reminds me a lot of last year's game where, Clemson hadn't played anybody all year. They didn't lose a game, but they had a game similar to the North Carolina game and the Syracuse game. LSU is running through the entire their entire schedule against a strong SEC team. I believe Alabama was laying about a touchdown last year as well. And I got to think Venables with the time off is going to, slow Burrows down. His yardage prop is like 365.5. Our colleague Ben Brown, I believe, is going to write up a little bit of those. And I think the under there is a good play. And so you look at that game, it'll be fun to watch. I think Clemson's really the only side you can bet here. But I wouldn't be surprised to see LSU blow them out either. I mean, it's happened before.
All right, that was our college football segment. You ready for the championship games?
Yep.
Let's do this thing. So the first game is the AFC. It is going to be Tennessee at Kansas City. I purposefully did not look at any of the lines. I know you can't contain yourself, so I know you already know what the line is. I think Kansas City should be favored by 8.5. You want to let me know that I'm going to guess that it's higher.
Nope. It is 7.5.
Really?
It opened at 6 when Tennessee was in the driver's seat in that game. And now it's been bet up to 7.5, but it's 115 to Tennessee side, obviously getting the hook at 7, 105 at Kansas City side. It's interesting to me that Kansas City getting behind by that much and then just steaming Houston is worth 1.5. But that's, recency bias is what it is. But total on this game, 52, which would have been covered in the first half of today's game with Kansas City versus Houston. So what do you think?
That's interesting. The reason I had it at 8.5 is that Tennessee has played, they've gotten a lot of really good bounces. Right, so they played a Patriots team who offensively is just inept. And then they went into Baltimore, and all the things that we talked about going wrong for Baltimore, which were, fumbles, interception, those things that just hadn't happened for Lamar Jackson all year happened. They also go 0 for 2 on fourth downs. They get both of those things to happen for them. And if they don't get all of the bounces to go their way, then they all of a sudden have to rely on Ryan Tannehill. And as he's been fine, but I'm going to take Pat Mahomes over Ryan Tannehill, and by a large margin every single time. Yeah,
Tennessee offensively, as we said going into the week, second highest EPA per play after Tannehill starting, both as a passing team and as a total offense. Baltimore was first. Kansas City, I believe, was third or fourth. So their offense, I think, can keep up. But again, it's what you said. It's when there are perturbations to the system. Can they keep, again, for one, the Chiefs didn't grade well pressure-wise this year, but you can tell it's very similar to how Green Bay acted today. If you can cover a little bit on the back end, you can get pressure, and Tannehill takes sacks. It didn't come up much on Saturday, but he takes sacks as badly as any quarterback, in the league. And, Kansas City's, noise levels, they're record-setting at times, getting off the ball.
Well, you'll be there.
Yeah, Frank Clark, all those folks getting off the football. I do think
excited for your voice on Sunday.
I think it'll be a good test for Tennessee. I don't hate the over here, just because I do think Tennessee will punch Kansas City a few times, but Kansas City, I think, is the side here, and here's why. One of my biggest concerns with Andy Reid has always been, especially laying the points in these types of games, has always been his penchant to let the foot off the pedal.
Yeah.
And you look at what is in front of Andy Reid over the last 2 days. Tennessee came in and basically did you a favor. They whooped Baltimore, a team that you were going to be underdogs to in the AFC title game.
You get to go on the road.
You get to play a home game. Tennessee is a formidable opponent, one, so you're not going to sleep on them. And then you had the scare today. And so for me, they've had this happen before. The last time they played the Titans both the last two times they played the Titans in Arrowhead, they had double-digit leads and gave them up and lost, right? The last game that they had when they played the Titans in Tennessee, they had a 9-point lead in the fourth quarter, lost. I think Andy Reid does what he does today and puts the foot on the pedal and kind of, I think, wins handily in this game.
Here's why. So that was one of the reasons. I totally agree with you. And I want to root for Andy Reid. But here's the other thing. Name for me the receivers that the Tennessee Titans have faced so far.
In the playoffs, it's not much.
It's Julian Edelman with a cracked rib, apparently, and the desire to jump on top of a vehicle in Beverly Hills. And then Marquise Hollywood Brown, and that is it. So when they all of a sudden have to face Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, Travis Kelce, and Andy Reid, and Pat Mahomes in Kansas City, like, that's a rude awakening to me. Mm-hmm. So I'm, again, going to hop on the defense. Let me change it up for you. Defense isn't predictive. Past defensive outcomes are not predictive of future play.
We'll just say defense is a second-order concern.
I mean, I don't know what it'll take.
Yeah.
But
we don't mean to.
I actually like to see. I like to trigger people a little bit because it's fun. Like, I personally enjoy it. I love seeing people get really worked up on the internet.
Yeah,
because it's funny.
We had a fun person message us on our last episode, and he was basically like, "Hey, I love the show, but as a former defensive player, it does trigger me a little bit." Yeah. He's like, "I'm not going to not listen to the show because of this, but can you explain what you mean?" And I basically was just like, "Well, what I mean is that it's a second order. It's not the first thing you should ever think of when you try to handicap a game."
Absolutely.
And that's really what we mean. And again, you like to be a little bit inflammatory,
and stir the pot a little bit.
And I just like to mute people on Twitter, which is sort of is sort of what I've had to do over the last few days. But what we mean, I haven't
muted a single person. I think it's hilarious.
David Williams, the gracious person that messaged us on the last PFF Forecast.
So those are the reasons. I really agree with both of those, which is you would be concerned about Andy Reid, but I do believe that this is the perfect scenario for him because he's facing a team that is explosive offensively, and is facing a team that just did what almost happened to you. Yep. So it's like, I think in preparing for this game, he will have a oh shit moment where he's like, we need to try and win by 30.
Yeah.
And that is the ideal situation. The Tennessee offense, is it worth saying that are they overrated? Are they just not?
No, I don't think they're
properly rated.
No,
because I don't think we know that much about them given the two games they've played, right?
Well, no, they've played with Tannehill. They've played 12 games.
Sure, I'm talking about the two playoff games.
Yeah, well, and there are people who think. So I tweeted out that they had a 14% chance to win the Super Bowl after they won last night. And somebody's like, "You're not taking into account this playoff dominance." And I'm like, they were very good in the 10 games before. Like, we're taking into consideration the regular season with Tannehill, in which they were terrific.
Yeah.
So, I don't understand what folks are, upset with. The fact is Kansas City's just a better football team. And that's why the market, you don't want to believe us, believe the betting market, because that's, the wisdom of the crowds. They're 7.5-point underdogs. Just like the next game we're going to talk about. If you think Green Bay is awesome and better than San Francisco, then why are they getting 7 points half a season after they were only getting 3? San Francisco did not have a great second half of the season.
Apparently, the Green Bay Packers in one game have erased the entire season.
Well, and that's the thing. So Tennessee is a 12-game sample of Mariota, and it's been great.
You mean Tannehill?
Tannehill. Tannehill, and it's been great. It's helped Derrick Henry. It's helped A.J. Brown. It's helped even Corey Davis. Johnny, all those kind of guys have been great. But I don't think that they're overrated. What I think is that I think that the skepticism about them is warranted, and Kansas City has a far bigger and far more weathered experience this season and last. And that's why in this game, I think people are gravitating towards Kansas City, or at least initially, because we just know more outcomes with Kansas City, and they end up on the positive end of those outcomes more often than not.
I think I like the over almost more. If I had to bet this game one way, I would take the over. And the reason is just what you said about Andy Reid. But I could see this being the Chiefs get out to a big lead. They're obviously not going to take the foot off the gas, but then you do have the Titans having to throw the ball. And to me, it's like, okay, if Ryan Tannehill's going to get sacked a bunch of times, you've got like sack fumbles, but if he holds on to it, he's probably going deep. Those receivers can win. So I don't know, 52 feels low to me. I mean, are they expecting snow? Because even if so, I'm not super worried about it. Patrick Mahomes is ridiculous. Yeah. Okay, the next game. So I guessed the line for, I thought San Francisco was going to win. So I just did the two possibilities for Green Bay and San Francisco. And for Green Bay, I thought San Francisco would be favored by 6.5. And you said it's 7?
It is 7.
So that tells you that I actually would bet Green Bay getting 7 in this game. If I was going with my number here. 7 though, I think feels about right. And it probably goes to show that outside of Wisconsin, people probably didn't take that 5-point win as meaning a ton.
Yep.
They are going on the road. The last time they went to San Francisco, by the way, we backed Aaron Rodgers.
We did. We absolutely we bet on Green Bay that night.
One of the poorest performances in his career, but that's long in the past, right? Now he looks awesome. I think the big difference here is that the San Francisco offense right now is really tough to stop. Unless you get Jimmy G throwing straight to a linebacker, they are going to expose every weakness that you can possibly have. And on the flip side, they're not going to allow Devontae Adams to just run free, right? And so I think they make it a little harder on the Packers.
Yeah. So here's the deal. So somebody was saying, Wilson was under pressure more than half his, dropbacks. And, I think somebody is going to project, and this is, again, why defense, when we talk about defense doesn't matter, this is what we mean. Wilson takes pressure on 23 of 43 dropbacks, over 50%. So the Packers clearly have a great pass rush, people will think. And so that projects onto San Francisco and their offensive line and their quarterback and their play caller. And if Jimmy G, I'll admit, if Jimmy G takes pressure on half his dropbacks, the 49ers are in trouble.
Yep.
But that's not going to happen because Jimmy G does not invite pressure as much as Wilson. He gets rid of the ball quickly. He has the lowest ADOT in the league. And he'll turn the ball over a few times. He'll make some head scratching throws, but it's not the same thing, right? The offense is what matters here. And I think when you look at San Francisco, I just think that they control this game, on offense to the point. Like I think this number's fine. I'd be surprised if we were on San Francisco's side from a mathematical perspective, but I do agree with it being this far out here because of the relative health of San Francisco, but also I just don't think that they're gonna give the Green Bay Packer defense what Seattle gave them this game.
I'm with you totally, and I think 7 is pretty spot on. The reason that I think 7 is pretty spot on is that I still think that Jimmy G is going to give you one, right? And so if that comes at the right time for the Green Bay Packers and they're able to catch it and take it back for a touchdown, that's a huge play, and that would be a reason why they wouldn't run away with this game. What's the total at?
45, which I think feels kind of right.
Yeah, I do. We're thinking about this is also, by the way, homecoming for Aaron Rodgers Part 2, also homecoming for Devontae Adams, former Palo Alto High School alumni.
Adams kind of tanked their opportunity in that first game by getting a penalty called on him on the first catch of the game.
Yeah, so it's a huge redemption spot for both of those guys. I just have a hard time seeing San Francisco steamrolling them the same way again, which is why I think 7 feels right.
The spot-related stuff that we talked about on the last podcast matter. And San Francisco against Minnesota was getting a whole week off, health, and Minnesota is getting one less day off. Green Bay is getting more than a day less than San Francisco here and traveling from the Central Time Zone to the Pacific Time Zone. That matters too. And it's it's interesting here. that was the case. Tennessee sort of gets the flip because they were able to beat a 1 seed. They get a full day off more than Kansas City will. But I think that those things, if I were, let's say I made the line 6, it being 7 with all those things folded in, right? I would not necessarily bet Green Bay as a result.
Yeah, it's tough because as much as we talked about, Green Bay is not as good as their record. They're not. So neither was Seattle. But Seattle was built in a way that they could always kind of keep the game close with San Francisco, and they were able to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not like, if Aaron Rodgers is playing, at the level that he played today, that they're the same way, right? And that they're going to be able to keep the game close. Because if Jimmy Graham has a resurrection and Devontae Adams is at full health, right? Like, they have that ability to just kind of like bring it back. And so that's what would scare me a little bit. So I think this one is pretty darn efficient. I'm really struggling. If you have to take one team against the spread.
Here's the thing. It's really hard for me to bet against Rodgers getting points in this spot, because there's always, so if Rodgers plays out of his mind, they cover this, right? If Rodgers plays averagely, they have a pretty good chance of covering this, right? Because average Rodgers, like historically, broad career, is better than Kirk Cousins. And I think if Kirk Cousins performs like an average quarterback yesterday, they probably keep the game within a touchdown, right? Mm-hmm. If Aaron Rodgers plays like horseshit like he did the last time he went to San Francisco, then it's a blowout, right? And then you have no shot. So what are the probabilities that those three things happen? In my opinion, I think that today's game was Green Bay trying to show the world, including us, that they were not the worst, 3-13 team in the history, 13-3 team in the history of the league. And I don't know if the same, how motivated you have to be for an NFC Championship games, but I don't think this is going to be some special kitchen sink game for Green Bay.
Well, it's just nice to know that I brought Aaron Rodgers back to life.
Yes, you did, and then I got a lot of shit for it because apparently I was the one that said defense doesn't matter.
Look, you're a partner in crime. The only thing you have going for you is that your family doesn't hate you.
Oh, sure.
Which is interesting. I'm actually wearing a shirt that my sister just sent me.
Nice. I love it.
In the mail.
I like it. North Swole.
The North Swole.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Like it.
It's a pretty cool shirt. Anyways, shout out to my sister, who, by the way, goes to school in Seattle, and so is now trying to tell me that she may or may not be rooting for the Seahawks, which is not okay.
From here on out, because they lost tonight.
Well, right, but just in general, it's not okay.
So if because we've forced, I think, some non-spread picks onto the article. They have the team totals. They have not.
Yes.
They have not. What if? So here's the scenario. What if none of the 4 picks, the total spread, have any value this week? Do we just take the week off?
Well, because I think we will have some value.
Okay.
I feel decently about the over in Tennessee, Kansas City. If I had to pick both of these games against the spread, I would take. God dang it!
At 7.5, it's tough. But
7.5. I would take Kansas City, and at 7, I would take Green Bay.
Okay. Here's what I would do. And again, we talked about this the other day with Seattle as a teaser leg.
No, I'm just saying, get to the teasers in a second. Yeah. Tell me who you'd take in each of these games.
So I would take Kansas City in the over in their game. I would take Green Bay and under in the San Francisco game, because I do think so I think this is correlated. I think if Green Bay covers this number, it's over. And I think if San Francisco covers this number, it's probably under. Much like the Vikings game, right? 27-10 is, I think, an outcome that can happen a lot here. Mm-hmm. But I also think Green Bay could lose a barn burner 30-34. And, the total goes over, just like we saw it tonight, right? Like, the game played under the whole first half, basically. And then in the second half, Seattle emerged and the game went over.
Well, I think a sneaky thing here is that I believe that Kansas City's home field is super legit.
Mm-hmm. Especially with me there.
And I'm just going to say this. I would suspect that there is a decent bit of Green Bay fans that make their way
There's some Minnesota fans
into San Francisco.
Yeah.
Just because, they just travel well, and there's a good Green Bay following like all around. So
Right.
I can see that happening, and so that sways me a little bit.
So if you take
So now your teaser. Give me your teaser.
Well, I mean, there's just a couple you could do here. You could tease the Chiefs through 7-3 down to 1.5.
Correct.
And you can tease San Francisco through 7-3 down to 1. That's basically, you give up a little bit more, but you could basically just money line parlay San Francisco and Kansas City. And I believe, you'd be getting less than even money, but it's, like not the squarest thing.
It's not
anybody's ever bet. You could also, and I think that this is, so it actually pays quite a bit less than even money. But if you do, and the other thing you could do is if you think Tennessee keeps it close or Green Bay keeps it close, you could tease both up, to would it be 13.5 in both cases, but you don't get the key numbers necessarily. Like 10's a key number, but it's not as big, and then you don't even get up to 14 in both of those instances. So to me, it's there's one teaser and it's down to both favorites, especially in the case of Kansas City because the total's being 52, and when you tease games, the totals should be lower.
Well, here's the thing: Vegas is begging you to tease both the favorites.
Yeah, I mean. Right, but that was less than they were last week. More than they were last week for sure. Because
Absolutely.
last week
we saw some 9.5s.
Last week there were some both of the numbers got to sort of like teaser. For a 6-point teaser, they got to positions where they were sort of teaser proof. You could only tease them down to -3, which is not a good play given the number of games that land on 3. So with these games, you can, as you said, they're begging you to either money line parlay the favorites or tease them down to 1.5. And if you want to see the Elvis Gerbach Bowl, I do think that's not a terrible,
Yeah, Green Bay, Tennessee, not the greatest potential Super Bowl. San Francisco, Kansas City is the best option. You can yell at me if you want. That's what I thought would happen, and it's close. San Francisco, Tennessee, I think would be just as awful. Anything with Tennessee in it, I just don't think would be super fun.
Yeah, they did play one of the most exciting Super Bowls. Their first year as the Tennessee Titans.
True.
But yeah, that was think about Tennessee, St. Louis was that Super Bowl. Can you imagine the geography there? So, I agree with you. I think the Packers being in the Super Bowl is always compelling for
Oh, absolutely.
much of, but obviously that requires them beating San Francisco, and I think San Francisco is a draw, a far bigger draw in many ways. Given their geography, Kansas City is one of the historic franchises. They were the second AFL team to win a Super Bowl and sort of cause the merger when they beat the Vikings in the Super Bowl IV. So, and that was their last Super Bowl.
So Kansas City right now, the most likely team to win the Super Bowl by a couple of percentage points over San Francisco. Part of that, right, is that they're favored by more than at home against Tennessee than San Francisco is against Green Bay. But also, should both those teams get there, they have the quarterback we took first versus the quarterback that we took last, right? And like that just matters, and it matters a lot. And if things don't go perfectly for San Francisco, they have less of a shot of winning. Whereas if things don't go perfectly for Kansas City, they have this ace in the hole that can just make it happen.
Let's play a little bit of a game here. So let's look at the 4 permutations. So Tennessee, Green Bay, what's the spread?
Green Bay by 3.
Okay, I thought 2.5 would have been mine. Okay, so I'll do the next one. If it's Green Bay versus Kansas City, I think Kansas City is laying 5.5. No. That one, neutral field, 5.5. What do you think?
I'm gonna go less, and here's why. That would mean Rodgers will have beaten
San
Francisco. I think that pushes them up. I think it's 4.5. 4.
Okay. Now, if it were, so we did Green Bay both times. So if it were San Francisco versus Tennessee, what would you have it?
I would have San Francisco by 7.
Okay. I thought 6.5.
Okay.
And then if it were the one that the most likely situation, San Francisco versus Kansas City, I think it would be Kansas City by 3.5.
Wow. Okay, I think it'll be Kansas City by less than 3.
Okay,
2.5.
So those are our early prognostications.
Now, if it's 2.5, I would take the Chiefs.
If it's 3.5, you take the Niners.
And if it's 3.5, I think I would take the Niners.
Yeah.
And if it's 3, I will wait for the game to play.
And you know, if we've never. So here was an interesting thing when we talked about futures on this show. We almost never thought the Ravens were a value. I mean, early in the season, we actually had them under. We had their under win total. We didn't like them to win the division. We were clearly wrong about them because our data on Lamar showed a lot of turnover worthy plays. Yep. Bad efficiency in the passing game. And so when you were moving forward, I was starting to get a little nervous that I had almost no exposure to Baltimore. But then the Saints flopped. But the one that we've really said that has always had value is Kansas City. If you have Kansas City, if you have Kansas City at, plus 600, plus 700, whatever it ends up being, and
looking at me,
they get to the Super Bowl against your 49ers, and Kansas City's laying 3.5 points, you are in almost a perfect spot because you can buy quite a bit of it back on the Niners.
Let me tell you why I'm in a perfect spot, because I also have Niners futures.
Well, there's that. That's why you gobble some of that up.
Yep. So it'll be fun, man. I'm excited. We will be back with you on Thursday. We'll be packing. You'll be ready to go to Kansas City. I'm
leaving Friday afternoon, so I'll be good.
You got to prepare.
You got to prepare.
We'll get you ready to go.
My cheese head.
Yeah. That's a good look for
you.
Go
Packers, I guess.
I've already said it. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't impact me at all. Mike, anything else we need to talk about? No, we're good.
Everything kosher? All
right. Mike is going to see McGregor.
Nice.
This weekend. So you guys are both off doing well.
Two heavyweights.
Who's more likely not to make it back?
I think it's easily Mike, given his age.
Mike is going to Vegas. Mike, have you ever been to Vegas? He has. Okay, yeah. So maybe he's a veteran. You'll make it back. Anyways, thanks, guys. We'll see you.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.